What's up, closers? This is Kevin.
This is Ryan.
This is Becca, and you're listening to the Close of Business podcast,
The one and only STEM podcast for young professionals.
When the company laptops close,
the beer's open,
and the conversation flows.
all of this and more happens
at the close of business.
We're talking teams.
We're talking teams. What's up, closers? What's going on?
Are we recording?
We are recording.
What's up?
We do this every time. We're like, wait, are we really going? And it still never gets old.
It probably sounds like we're idiots, but we actually are surprised every time we start recording.
Yeah.
I was actually looking up a cookbook in the middle of looking up some recipes.
What? Are you going the Whole30 route or something?
I need to after this past week.
I know, right? We kind of destroyed ourselves. We just ate and we interviewed people and we
networked
and drank because that's what you do when you're at a conference. Where were we at?
Singularity University.
We were in San Francisco.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dope as hell.
It was. So yeah, if you guys don't follow us on Twitter or Instagram, I suggest you do, so you can follow along with what's going on. But we just got back from a Exponential Technologies, Exponential Innovation Conference in San Francisco called the Singularity University Global Summit. Pretty much a conference covering blockchain, artificial intelligence, next-gen transportation, smart cities, data. I mean, what else?
It's great because it's like a bunch of super smart, entrepreneurial-minded people showing off what's going on in the tech space and how it's going to solve world problems. If you don't leave this conference jazzed up, nothing will make you feel that way.
Yeah.
I left pretty jazzed up.
I'm extremely excited for the future, but I'm ready for some of this technology to start getting implemented because we keep talking about the future, and I'm ready for that to be now. For example, I need the Hyperloop.
I watched Kevin get light therapy, which
God.
made him hallucinate. So that was fun.
Light therapy is, I don't know if it's therapy. It's supposed to be relaxing, but let me tell you, I was kind of freaking out, but like in a good way.
Alice in Wonderland style.
Yes, like I was going through
a fast vacuum space tube.
It essentially was like, what was that show with Matt Damon? Or was it even Matt Damon, the guy that looks like Matt Damon with the books and the bookshelf? He communicates by pushing books out.
Oh, Interstellar?
Interstellar.
Yeah.
Like that whole Interstellar.
That's
like,
Matthew McConaughey.
Jeez.
They don't even look the same.
Not even close. Oh, I'm thinking of like the Eat Your Poop or Cook with
The Martian. You put The Martian and Interstellar together, which don't compare those two movies because Interstellar is so ridiculous.
It's kind of tight.
I can't even watch it because it's so absurd and unrealistic. I know it's a science fiction movie, but it's unrealistic.
We're digressing from our digression. So anyways, it looked like I was in this worm tunnel and all these colors were flying past me, kind of like tapestry of flashing colors, and they would change, and it was...
I also watched Kevin make a pizza using an AR/VR headset.
Oh, I was like, when did I make a pizza?
Yeah. And then I didn't do any of these things. I just stood off by the sideline taking photos and videos of him looking ridiculous. And it was great.
We controlled robots with our mind.
I didn't. I apparently am not focused.
Yeah, it's like it reads if you're focused or not focused. Apparently there's like alpha and beta signals, but I can only send alpha signals because that's just who I am. So
that was the most like mansplained thing you could have ever said.
I don't mansplain. Don't taint me with that.
I hate that word.
So yeah, we just came back from Singularity University. It was just Becca and I and our new marketing lead, Sarah. Oh yeah,
shout out Sarah.
She helped out a ton. We've added some people to the team here at Close of Business. For those of you who might not know, we lost half the team, and it's just been me, Becca, and Ryan.
Are we talking teams?
We're talking teams, and we added some marketing people. So hopefully, we start growing this podcast a little bit
more.
Anyways, Ryan is currently in Spain going door to door, spreading the good word of the Close of Business podcast
while also hitting up the clubs of Ibiza and living the time of his life. Yeah. I don't know. We might have had more fun. I felt more fulfilled than he did. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Let's be honest. Ryan's not having a great time backpacking across Europe. It probably sucks.
Yeah, that's terrible. That doesn't sound like fun to me. I'm happy we're here
in this closed off office
conference room that we're using as a studio right now.
No windows, fluorescent lighting. It's wonderful. So what we have coming up for you is one of our interviews from Singularity University.
We did an interview with Prukalpa Sankar. She is the co-founder of 2 different companies. One is called SocialCops and one is called Atlan, both focused on creating data platforms for people and utilizing data for good.
Did you mention her age? You didn't mention her age. She's 27 years old.
Yeah. So this was really awesome because not only did we get to learn about what her companies do and why data is so important, which sounds lame, just listen. It's actually really interesting. But we also got to ask her so many questions about her thoughts on age and, you know, how she accomplished as much as she did at such a young age. We felt like kind of like peasants in comparison to her.
Well, we essentially are peasants, but this episode and this interview in general really brought up the question data. And initially I think we tried to get in there and talk about like data, like, you know, you hear Amazon, Facebook, etc. But we really wanted to focus on, because what her companies focus on is using data for good. Mm-hmm. So you'll find out through the course of the interview, her companies use data to help people below the poverty line. But needless to say, we do need to have an episode. I don't think we have time in this episode. We will have an episode in the future talking about
the big dark data.
The big data, the big D. The big D, you said it. Okay.
We're going to talk about it at some point in the future, but go ahead and listen to Prukalpa. She's awesome. This is one of our favorite interviews we had. Prukalpa, shout out.
It's long, but
let's be friends forever.
Yeah. And it's long, but I swear if you listen to the whole thing, you won't be disappointed.
All right. Love you. Bye.
Love you.
So we're here today with Prukalpa Sankar, co-founder of not one but 2 companies, SocialCops and Atlan. And I already got a really good vibe from you. You walked in with your Air Force Ones on. I love your sneakers. And I was like, she's going to be a cool person to talk to. And not only that, I think we're in the presence of a celebrity. My celebrities are people who give TED Talks, and you've given a TED Talk.
Yes.
For most people, it's, you know, actresses and actors. For me, it's people who give TED Talks.
So you're essentially the authority on big data is what we're saying right now. You gave a presentation which we were able to attend, which we're happy about, and we're just like super excited to have you on, so thank you. Jump into some icebreaker questions just to, you know, kind of get the conversation flowing. Beck, I'm going to let you do it because you did the research.
Okay. So true or false, you made a website for Harry Potter fans when you were young?
I actually did. I still think it was my crowning achievement. This was when Google was still really small.
Yeah.
It was like the early 2000s. And so SEO was basically about putting a bunch of tags on your header text. I still think that my biggest achievement was that I managed to rank in the first 10 results.
Oh my God.
When you search for Harry Potter on Google.
Oh my, that actually is a huge accomplishment. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was 10.
What?
Yeah.
Oh.
So you were 10 years old and you knew what SEO was.
SEO was really easy back then. It was, like I said, it was basically putting words in your header text. That was it.
For
it was
like,
really
you know, reference at 10, I was playing G.I. Joes or like.
Yeah, I was just outside getting dirty, like playing in the yard. I wasn't writing code for a website.
How old are you? Do you mind if are you like
today?
Yeah.
I'm 27.
27. Okay,
Yeah.
so
You're still younger.
I'm still younger, so I've got a year to start 2 companies and be named 30 under 30 and all that. All right, good to know. So then,
Harry Potter fan. So if you were in a house, what house would you be in?
Gryffindor or Ravenclaw. I used to think I would be Ravenclaw.
Okay,
but
that's a good
kind
one.
of what I thought too.
Yeah, I used to think I would be Ravenclaw, but I don't know. Now that I've become an entrepreneur, I think maybe Gryffindor. Yeah,
I could see you being a Hermione type. I would cheat off of you in history of
I'm
magic class
totally a
for
Hermione
sure.
type. You know what? My birthday is the same as Hermione Granger's birthday.
Oh my god!
Oh my god! So yeah, you're the
so
same.
Cool, right?
You're like the actual reincarnation of Hermione Granger. This is awesome. Oh my gosh!
I think
that
if
is
I'm
the
being
best
honest,
compliment someone's given me.
I think I'm a little bit of a Slytherin type myself.
Oh, you 100% are.
Yeah,
You kidding?
Unfortunately.
Definitely. Okay, so if you played Quidditch, what position would you play, do you think?
I don't think I'll play Quidditch.
Okay, that's a
wouldn't play
legitimate
Quidditch?
answer. That's legitimate.
That's a Hermione answer.
Well, that's a Hermione answer.
That is
Yeah.
a Hermione answer.
That's a
God, you are
Man,
Hermione.
You're on brand. Okay, so your website, it exists, right? If I were to Google it, do you know the URL of it?
So unfortunately, it exists on archives because I built it on GeoCities and then they shut it down or whatever. But you'll find it if you search for Pru_Harry_Potter because that was the only name that I found back then.
Yeah.
And it's like there's an archived version somewhere on the internet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and listen to the episode and Google that. So I also built a website in high school for my favorite soccer team, Liverpool.
Oh, very
And
cool.
hearing that you built a website reminded me that I built a website, but I was in high school. I wasn't 10 years old, and I can't find it, and I'm kind of upset. Do you know? So it's probably in archives, is what you're saying? If it was like a long time ago, or is it just because?
It could be. It completely depends on what you use to build the website.
Can I use your company to find it? Like, can you collect some data and then can you go search for my website?
I wish.
Okay, maybe that should be your next task. Okay.
All right. Well,
All right.
we've
Put it into the
established
roadmap.
we've got a real life Hermione Granger, real life
A
data
data
wizard
wizard.
here with us. So now we'll go into talking about what you actually do besides, being a Harry Potter fan and Hermione
coolest,
Granger.
yeah.
Yeah. So in college, what did you study and what did you want to be when you grew up?
Or what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, you're still young.
you're still- yeah.
I went to Singapore to do my undergrad, and I studied chemical and biomolecular engineering. I was really into healthcare back then. My mom, so backstory to this is my mom used to teach genetics
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow.
when I was a kid.
So that predisposed you to that whole world.
Yeah, so I think I was probably one of the youngest kids to know the meaning of the word gene, and
yeah.
it
Yeah.
would be like really cool. And I was like, oh wow,
Other
like
than,
I can.
what you wear, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, other than that, and
exactly.
I was like, oh my god, I can totally edit this, and I can, stuff like that. So that's actually what got me interested in healthcare. And I grew up in India, which meant that basically, broadly, you had three options of what you could do once you grew up.
Yeah.
One was be an engineer, the other is a lawyer, or the third is a doctor.
So you kind of did a cross
Yeah.
between the two, between engineer and doctor in a way.
I didn't want to make the decision too early, but but I was good in STEM, and it just made sense, and so got a scholarship to go study in Singapore.
Cool.
Studied chemical and biomolecular engineering.
Uh-huh.
Did a bunch of research in university. And realized very quickly that being in a lab was not for me.
Yeah.
And that's when I got involved in entrepreneurship, did a minor in entrepreneurship, and I think, that's how the whole startup thing happened.
And how'd you get into, I guess, is it coding or like the data world from that background?
Yeah, I wish I had a better connected story to tell this. There's a lot of serendipity. I met my co-founder Varun on campus. We both used to take part in hackathons together.
Okay.
And we were in our final year of university, and we were like, hey, we should do a bunch of side projects. Everyone else was applying for jobs in investment banks and things like that. And we were don't like that much.
Yeah.
And so we were like, okay, we should give this a shot. And our first startup, SocialCops, actually started out as a side project. It was basically us, two 20-year-old kids sitting in a dorm room somewhere in Singapore saying, there are all these big problems out there in the world, like national level healthcare budgets and people living below the poverty line, and they're not using data at all.
Yeah.
And that seems like a problem. And I think in most other worlds, and you grow up as an engineer and you use data for everything that you do,
true.
right? And so it didn't make sense, and so we said, maybe we should do something about it.
Yeah.
And this was when crowdfunding sites had just gotten started. Kickstarter was just getting started.
Yeah.
And people were doing these really terrible things on Kickstarter and getting funded.
So
you're like, okay, we're in a good position. More than likely, people are going to fund us give us some money.
Yeah. I was like, we're saying we're going to solve India's biggest problems.
Right.
People are going to give us money. We didn't get much money, I think.
So we got $5.
That was funny. What do you mean you're not?
Yeah, we got $600 through it.
That's something.
That was but what was amazing was, I think, so we put up the site at 4 a.m. and went to sleep. We woke up the next morning, and it had back then in my version of my life gone viral, and people were sharing it all over Facebook, and people were connecting me and saying, hey, you should speak to my aunt who does this, and you should do this, you should speak to this person. And I on this third day, I think we were on the front page of newspapers.
Oh,
so
wow.
it was just
you blew up.
We were like, wow.
Yeah.
And then we spent a year figuring out what the real problem was and what could we really be building. But we realized that there was a real problem out there.
This is something we were kind of discussing this morning, that there's so much data out there that's being utilized for things that aren't really important. And that's like the main premise of this platform that you've created, is that think about, you're watching a game and the announcers have the most ridiculous statistics and data that they can pull, like
out of nowhere,
like, oh, this is the 7th shot from behind the 3-point line within the past 2 minutes and 35 seconds. And we're utilizing data for things like that don't really matter. They don't have human impact.
So could you quickly, you mentioned you started SocialCops in your dorm room because you're looking at below the poverty line. They're not using data and whatnot. So could you explain what the purpose of SocialCops was and what you guys were trying to accomplish specifically?
So when we started, our mission was actually pretty simple. It was, there are big problems out there that can impact human lives in healthcare and education and infrastructure and governance and policy. And they're not using data as well as they should. And we should do something about it. And we spent 5 years building up SocialCops into potentially one of the world's leading data for good companies, working with everyone from, we're a global partner for the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals. We've built the National Data Platform for the Government of India, which the Prime Minister himself uses.
Small client.
Not big. Not a big deal.
And really, I think, really pushing the frontier of what is possible when you use data in settings like that, and especially low resource settings around the world.
So for our listeners that don't necessarily understand, what do you mean when you say use data? Like, so what does SocialCops do to use data? Or is it just you're going out there collecting it, or are you actually analyzing it, or both?
You're giving people like a database that they can access. What exactly do you guys do with this platform?
So at SocialCops, we basically actually very quickly morphed into an end-to-end consulting organization. Our customers didn't have engineering teams or tech teams. And so basically we were solving the problem end to end. So we would start with a problem statement, and those problem statements would really be as high level as I remember. We were working on this government program to provide clean cooking fuel to 80 million below poverty line women.
Oh, wow.
And that was basically, we need to make this more efficient, so we'd start with like problem statements like that. And then we'd work backwards, right from, the strategy to then figuring out and collecting the data that it needs. And collecting data by itself has all different facets to it, right? In some cases you already have the data. In some cases you need to go out and get it from external secondary sources. In some cases you need to deploy apps to actually collect it from the ground up. So we would do all of that, analyze it, convert it into usable insights that ultimately decision makers could use.
Yeah, and I think I remember seeing on one of your presentations, you had something like 17,000 people download your app and locate all the existing
gas centers.
Gas centers.
Yeah. So, we actually have about close to, at this point, I guess, 100,000 people on the ground using our data collection product now at Atlan, collecting data in areas that have absolutely zero internet, in an app that works without internet in the local language.
Wow.
By someone who potentially has a $10 to $20 phone, and transmitting that data back.
That's awesome, because you're giving people in third world or developing countries without high-end technology that we have in first world countries like the United States, you're still giving them the opportunity to contribute data as well, which I think is awesome. And that's you need those people to do that in order to solve their problems. So you're giving them the ability to do that.
So you dropped the name Atlan. That's the second company that you're co-founder of, right?
Yeah.
What do you guys do at Atlan?
Sure. So while we were building up SocialCops, I think what we learned was how hard it was to run and scale data teams. Data teams are one of the most diverse teams that exist ever. You need an engineer who can deal with the scale of the data, to work with scientist who builds a model, a researcher, an economist, an analyst who understands the variable names, a business user who has context. And all these people have their own different skill sets, their own DNA, their capabilities, tools that they work with. And what that leads to is, what we now call collaboration overhead inside these teams. So, in our SocialCops days, the hardest thing for us was hiring a project manager that would be able to manage this very diverse team. But what that meant was that these teams weren't as agile as they could be, and they weren't accomplishing as much as they could. This is actually a huge global problem. Today, we, I think, spend about $120 billion annually on data solutions around the world.
Oh, wow.
But only 27% of these data projects are actually successful.
What? That's a lot of wasted money.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's a lot of inefficiency. And we, as we were up and close and executing these large-scale problems, realized that a large part of it was about how to make these people come together and work.
Right.
And that's really what we started building up, actually, initially for ourselves. At that point, the intent was just, we need to get better at what we do. And 18 months ago, we realized that, the tools we'd built were fairly powerful. We'd made our team almost 6 times more agile over time.
Wow.
And we said, hey, we've sort of hit on something here. Data teams were becoming more and more mainstream inside organizations. If you look at, I think, global organizations, almost 90% of them have a chief data officer today. In 2012, that number was 12%.
Wow.
So data is really becoming a function inside organizations. And so we said, hey, could our tools help data teams around the world?
Yeah.
And could we help them do their life's best work?
Yeah.
And that's how Atlan was founded.
I've heard people say that data is like the new oil. It's the new resource that we have to tap into in order to progress as a globe.
True or false, the technology of the future is kind of here in the present. It's just we don't have the data to allow the technology to operate at max capacity. Is that a true statement, that it's the data that's limiting us and not necessarily the technology, or is it a mixture of both?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think it would go too far to say that we have all the
Like
technology.
a
that we
chicken
need.
and egg scenario.
But I mean, let's look at the stats, right? I think today are generating about 2.5 exabytes of data every single day.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? If someone was to digitize basically every human word ever spoken in every language ever,
Yeah.
basically all of human history of communication, that would amount to 5 exabytes of data.
And you said 2.5.
We're generating half of that every day. So every 2 days.
What?
That's something else we were kind of wondering about.
How do you store that? Like, does that physically look like?
Crazy, right? And I think there's been enough computing power and actually, I think a lot of what the cloud has done. So it's not like machine learning is not new. Like machine learning existed
it's been around
50
forever.
years ago.
Yeah.
The only thing is now we actually have computing resources that is making it democratized. That's making it possible for people to actually use this.
What do you mean
data.
democratized?
Yeah.
Anyone, anywhere can basically spin up cloud computing resource and start making sense of this data, which didn't exist even 20 years ago. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, like universal accessibility.
But that being said, I mean, even today, I think only about 0.5% of the world's data is actually being analyzed.
What?
So we have the ability to solve even more problems. The data's out there. It's just we need to tap into it, organize it, and get it in the hands of the right people who can analyze it for good, essentially.
Absolutely.
So is that like creating a Google Drive of data that everybody can access, like in layman's terms?
So I think actually the challenge that we see, and some of this is what we're trying to solve with Atlan, the challenge doesn't actually lie in the fact that technology doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So if you look at it actually across the entire data lifecycle, right from data ingestion to analysis and cleaning and standardization and machine learning, all of these tools and technologies in the open source world actually already exist.
Yeah.
What we believe is actually the challenge is that a lot of people thought for a long time that we would be able to automate all of this, like it would be data in, data out, and decisions made. But I think people are increasingly being realizing that actually human context is incredibly important.
Okay.
And without human context, we can't use data the way we should. It's more complicated than that. And what that means is that people need to come together to be able to use this data. And so the challenge really that we believe is actually in the human experience of using data. How do we help these teams come together? To give you an analogy of this in another world, I don't know if you guys are aware of GitHub in the engineering world.
No, actually, if you want to explain that for our listeners too, that would be great.
Sure. So engineers around the world, computer engineers, basically collaborate on this product called GitHub, which is what they use for storing their code, version control, collaboration on code requests,
Cool.
stuff like that.
Okay.
It was actually just acquired by Microsoft for like $7.5 billion.
Oh, wow.
Like
So
that.
we're just ill-informed. We
Yeah.
just don't. That's a little bit of money.
Not a good look.
But what GitHub did was GitHub actually, so it's not like the technology for GitHub didn't exist. Git actually was an open source product that existed before GitHub. GitHub just came in and made it really easy for engineers to come together and collaborate and build a team.
Yeah.
You'd see the same thing with what is now called the product team inside organizations. When you're looking at building digital product, you have an engineer who needs to collaborate with a designer.
Yeah.
They invented this role, product manager. These teams then they started using tools like Agile to work effectively together.
Yeah.
Products got built around them, like Jira and Zeppelin and so on and so forth. And now those teams are at a place where they actually you have a sense of how you should hire for those teams, how these teams should work together, how you should structure them, and what tools you should use for them. Data teams are not there yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think data teams are sort of going through that process.
But they will be with Atlan.
But hopefully they will be with that.
Yeah, so you're the next GitHub in the data realm.
Yeah, we're like GitHub built a home for engineering teams. We're hoping to build a home for data teams around the world.
That's also a couple years we'll be seeing that you're getting acquired by Microsoft for $8.5 billion or something like that, right?
Yeah, and then we're gonna name drop and be like, we talked to her.
I'm like legitimately excited that I get to talk to you because like in 20 years, like if you've already started 2 companies, do you ever just stop and like think about where you could be in 20 years? And like we're like, yeah, we interviewed her before she was cool.
She's already cool. Are you? She's already cool. Are you kidding? She walked in with Air Force Ones, dude. She's so cool.
She's dripping. All right.
So your mission is to help utilize data to solve world problems. So how exactly does data do that? How does data enable us to solve global problems?
Sure. So I think we can go back in history for this and we can go a little forward. But if you actually look at the history of the human race, actually data has always helped humankind move forward.
Yeah.
If you study how NASA sent us up to the moon in the 1960s.
Yeah.
If you study, how we've gotten so close to eradicating polio today. And compare that to how long it took us to eradicate smallpox a couple of centuries ago, you'll actually start realizing that behind every single human achievement in the past, there's always been data in some way or form, just that it's been harder to use.
Yeah.
So in some cases, you would use, someone would actually calculate it on a paper. If you even study how the pyramids of Giza were built back then.
Do you know how they were built? How they built the pyramids?
So this is really cool, actually. Obviously, it's one of the most, architectural achievements of the world.
Yeah.
And it was built by basically people. Like there was no computers or anything back then, right? And one of the biggest challenges that they actually faced was how do they move these large boulders across the sand.
Didn't have cranes.
So it was just
they had aliens though.
So
Allegedly.
if you study that story, what they did was actually they discovered that if they basically pour water on the sand, it would reduce the friction.
Oh.
But the problem was if they poured too much water, it would slide.
Yeah.
Slip and slide. Yes.
So they actually back then calculated the water to sand ratio, and they figured out the exact ratio at which they should be actually dropping water on the sand so that they could move the boulders most efficiently.
That's cool.
That's a use of data back then,
Yeah.
right, to build the pyramids of Giza.
Yeah.
And so you'd see that in, every single story that mankind has ever gone through. There would be someone somewhere who believed in data and used it, and with obviously the computing resources that they had in that time. And I think that's what gives us the belief that if you think about the next century, right, every great human achievement, man landing on Mars, potentially a cure to cancer, all of these things will have data team behind it. The faster and better we can harness it, the faster we're going to move the world forward.
Oh, I love
Literally
that.
all the world's problems you're working on creating a solution for. That's crazy. So data can be used for good.
It should be.
It should be used for good. I think initial fears or initial thoughts when I hear data, and I think I want to get into it, is like it can also be used like for bad. And what I'm getting at is like privacy policies and how data is collected.
There's definitely just like a feeling of fear, right? Like a culture of fear surrounding data collection right now.
Yeah.
I guess.
Is that unfounded? Or?
Yeah. Is that fair? What do you think about that?
Sure. So I think it's a real challenge, right? But I think it's also true that every technology that has ever been created in the world has had a potential to be harnessed for good, and a potential to be harnessed for evil.
Right.
Right from nuclear power to pretty much anything that you've discovered in the world. And that's exactly what's happening with data right now. For the last 2 years, obviously there's a lot that has happened in the world where data has been used questionably. I think it's something that we as humanity have to figure out how to solve for. But if you sort of step back from that, and I know that there's a lot of fear and negativity today about how data can be used, but if you step back from that and actually look at all the good that data has done to us, like I said, I mean, you study the story of how we've gotten so close to eradicating polio today, and you realize that there was data behind it. And so if I think in the larger scheme of things, data has still done a lot more good for us than bad. But I think where we are today is at a juncture where obviously we've evolved so rapidly in technology and data and the way it can be used in the last decade, that sort of brings us to a point where we have questions to answer as society. Right? Policymakers need to start answering questions about what is the right way of using data, what are the ethical boundaries of data. There are companies and startups like ours where what we're trying to do is say, okay, what does it really take to build trust in the data that you use? What does it take to build trust in the teams that access this data?
During your presentation earlier today, I wrote that down specifically in my phone. You said, what do we have to do to start building trust in data again, so we can start using it for the right reasons? You
can have all my data. I trust you.
Well, we'll give it to you.
We'll start giving you data.
I want to contribute to solving world problems. I'll give you everything I got. You can have my social security number if you want, if that's going to help solve a problem.
It will. Someone can steal your identity and use that for good, right?
Yeah.
So that's how you can.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's hope that's not how. That's not what we need to do.
Okay. So, along with that is not only how the data is being used for good or bad, it's how is the data being collected. And do you know of the different ways data is being collected? Is it literally being collected every single, and when I say data, I don't mean formulas and equations and statistics. I'm talking about personal data from humans. I don't know if you've had it happen to you. You say something oh, I need to buy so-and-so, and then you get on Facebook and all of a sudden
you get an ad.
Yeah. So how is data being collected, and is it being collected without us knowing?
Sure. So, everything that we do today in the digital world leaves a trace. And so everything that we're doing leaves a trace somewhere, and that's data.
And even our voices, though.
Even our voices. If you have a smartphone around you, it's capturing it, and that is how data is being collected today. And it's something that all of us as consumers need to know. That being said, is it being done without our consent? Actually, in most cases, it probably is being done with your consent.
Oh,
and we don't realize it.
Right?
No.
And I think consumers aren't really realizing it because consumers don't really go and read the privacy policies of the apps that they download. I think that sort of goes back to two things, is how us as consumers, how do we start protecting ourselves better and start actually caring about this, right? If you really care about it, then download, read the privacy policy, right? And I think it also is beginning to put, more of an emphasis on the apps and the products to ensure that consumers actually know what they're getting into.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. That is the problem, is we shouldn't have to ask someone who's an authority in this space whether or not
we should know.
Yeah, we should know. This should be an open conversation, and we should be informed about it. I think it's something that we're keeping quiet and sliding under the table, and we just need to have an open conversation about it. And I think that's kind of what you're leading into by what you said.
So at what point, let's just say I download an app, and I don't know if this exists, but this app all of a sudden says it can listen to me because I downloaded it and I checked a box. At what point does that my thoughts, let's say I'm having a conversation about the next big idea, and it's my idea and I'm going to start a company, but this app that I said, you can listen to what I'm saying, they hear that, is it their property? Why is my conversations their property? Is there a line that what's their data versus what's my thoughts?
Sure. So I think it really goes back to this defining, and so there is no standard answer to this, right?
Okay,
It depends on the app, it depends on their policy, it depends on, and most apps out there honestly are not stealing your data.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're just like, using your data to
They just want to sell you stuff.
To sell you stuff.
Yeah, that's all they want to
right.
do.
Mostly out there in the world, it's not like they're gonna like take what you're saying and like, start something competing with it or something like that. That being said, I think it's also important for all of us as consumers to realize this, right? There is no free lunch out there. And so, there was a time when we would pay for newspapers and we don't anymore. And so those newspapers need to make money somehow. And so they're showing you ads. And to show you ads, they need your data. And, there was a time when we used to pay for phone calls. But we don't anymore on WhatsApp and Facebook. Which means that, they're going to need to make money somehow. Right? And that's what's resulting in all of these companies needing your data and sending you these ads and trying to sell you stuff. And I think what's been interesting is I think there are two things that are happening in the world that I think are interesting, and it'll be cool to see how they play out in the next decade. One is that you're actually starting to see sites starting to ask you to pay to use them, right? I'm sure you guys have seen this on YouTube. You can now pay for an ad-free experience.
Things like that.
Right? You can pay for an ad-free experience. You can pay a subscription, which means that your data stays with you. Which I think means that as a consumer, you have a choice. You have a choice that, I actually don't care if they use my data to try and sell me stuff, or I care a lot, and so I'm going to pay for this experience instead, which I think puts back the power in the hands of the consumer. I think the second thing that's happening is that in the slightly longer term, I think your data will start belonging to you, and you will have a choice on how you want to monetize it. So you're starting to see this already with, for example, I believe there's a leading health insurance company in the US, which is basically saying, if you give me access to your Fitbit data, I'm going to give you 10% off on your policy. And so you can start doing things like this, which makes sense, right? As someone who is a health insurance player, the more data I have about your health, the better I can price my premiums to you. And it's also great training data for me to be able to overall increase the efficiency of the way I'm pricing and I'm, giving out insurance packages. But for you as a consumer, it's a direct way for you to get a discount if you choose to do it. And I think you're starting to see that there are more and more sort of, there's this wallet concept getting created as you start thinking about, how data is, you mentioned oil. It's actually a little better than oil because you can use oil just once. You can use data over and over again, right? Which means it is a currency. And so, as people, can you choose how your data is used? And there's so many great things you can do with it, right? So in healthcare, for example, clinical trials actually is a place where a lot of data is needed and needs contribution from a lot of people giving back data so that we can actually maybe find a cure for some of the
world's greatest diseases
that we're battling against. And so maybe we as people can actually choose to give access to that data.
That's a really incredible way to think about it. I love that.
I've got an app idea, and I'm just going to give it to the world, I guess. So if it doesn't exist, then I lost my opportunity. Create an app, and maybe I'm pitching an app to you, and does your company want to buy it? Create an app that analyzes all the other apps on your phone and tells you straight up hey, you just click on it. It's literally just a one-pager. These are the apps and this is how they're using your data. Just letting you know, informing the consumer. It's a free app that will help you understand the privacy of what's going on your phone. Is that a good idea?
I think that's a great idea.
You want to buy
That's
that
a great
from me?
idea.
I do know that there are some people trying to build it, but no one succeeded yet, which means that there's an opportunity
There's an opportunity.
Are you going to quit your job?
Clock is ticking. You got to get moving, buddy.
Can you help
gotta
me?
get going.
Can you help me build the app?
First, we're gonna set up a GoFundMe to get you started.
And turns out,
maybe, hopefully, you raise more than $600.
Well, it turns out I know this person sitting next to me that might be able to invest a little.
He'll send you the GoFundMe link immediately afterwards. So I want to talk about some of the great awards and things that you've been named on. You've been listed for Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia, Fortune India, Forbes 40 Under 40, CNBC's Top 10 Young Businesswomen. And can you repeat how old you are?
I'm 27.
I love that. I love that. So a lot of our listeners are people in college finishing up their STEM degree, young professionals like us who are pretty young. So they'll be eager to hear your thoughts just on age in general. So does age matter to you? Has it ever occurred to you how young you are? Does it affect the way you think at all? What do you think about age?
Or like the respect people give you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on the other side of 25, I've actually started feeling old.
Oh my gosh.
It goes downhill, doesn't it?
It goes downhill. It's been downhill. I think my biggest learning has been that actually the world gives way too much importance to age. And many of us actually in our heads think that we're not old enough or we're not experienced enough. And I think experience does matter, but I think beyond that, actually hard work and curiosity and passion and really doing your best matters much more. We live in a world where, some of the world's best companies have been built by 20-year-olds. And
is that a humble brag? Or is Atlan one of the world's best companies?
Not yet. Hopefully we will be, right? But
that.
I mean, there are people my age, younger than me, who've built bigger and better companies out there in the world. Many of them are here in the Valley. Right? And I think it just goes on to show that, in today's world, we actually have an advantage if we're younger, which is actually interesting because if you think about it, all the technology we're using today is new. It's probably not more than 10 years old. So the most experienced engineer, in most cases, that you can hire who's worked on the technology that you want is probably not more than, 10 years experience in it, which means that in today's world, actually, with all the rapid change that's happening, the only change that's constant is change. You just need to be able to learn and grow and be passionate and keep learning and growing. And I think that's something that I think we've taken as a philosophy into also who we hire. So for example, one of our values as a team is one team, which means that we actually don't discriminate at all on the basis of your age, where you come from, where you went to college. None of those things matter. What matters is what you're bringing to the table, right? And we'll judge you the same way. So if you're hiring for a job and we're interviewing someone who's, 28 versus 22, if the 22-year-old is able to actually show the chops that a 28-year-old is, then why not? Right? In fact, it's better because, with even lesser experience or lesser time, this person's been able to do more, which is actually a good sign.
You get them for 6 extra years, potentially,
Hopefully. Hopefully.
And I think it just goes back to sort of believing yourself. I think one of our biggest learnings back then when we were in university and founded our first startup was my co-founder used to say this thing where, Varun would say, the best thing that we have in college is we have a student card. And a student card basically means that you can email pretty much anyone out there in the world and go to talk to them and say, I need your help. And almost everyone's going to respond.
That's so true.
And that's something that you never get anywhere else, right? When you're young, you have the time to experiment. You can really sort of grow exponentially. You can take risks. And I think we live in a world where more people should be taking that up. And by that, I don't mean, putting up Instagram posts and saying, I want to find my life's passion. I mean, actually going out there and working really hard and really figuring out how you can do something better. The more people who do that, the more chances are that the world's opened up for them.
I loved all your responses. Not only are you young, you're a woman working in the tech space as well. What would you say to young aspiring women in the STEM industry about your experiences and just some nuggets of advice about being a woman in the industry?
So I guess the first piece is that we need more women in tech. We do. But I think the second is that I think it really goes back to us as women at a very young age making choices that somehow have and maybe it's social conditioning and so many other things that have got us to a place where more and more women drop out of tech and STEM earlier than they need to. So back in my school days when I was in high school, my class, all the toppers were girls. Like all of us were girls. And then 2 years before university, we would do this thing where we would go study for engineering college entrances. And then I suddenly went to a class where we were totally 60 people, 55 were boys.
Wow.
And you see this, you go to college and there are hardly girls in class, and then you graduate college and then there are very few girls who choose to take jobs in STEM. And I've been trying to spend a lot of time trying to figure out why that happens, and some of it could really be just social conditioning,
totally.
right?
Culture.
If you go back to read, for example, textbooks for first graders, there would be a picture of the mother holding the child, singing a lullaby, pointing at the moon. There would be a picture of the dad teaching the kids math after class, right? These are small social conditioning that has happened to us, and sometimes we don't even know it. And I think some of that contributes to girls dropping out. Research shows that girls also, or women, tend to think that they're less capable than they actually are, and men tend to think that they're more capable than they actually are.
There's a thing. No, seriously,
overconfidence.
It's called the confidence gap. That's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. So companies like Google, for example, now when they actually give promotions, they actually have so they have this thing where you nominate yourself for a promotion when you think you're ready, and they actually have like an entire program where they're nudging women more to feel confident enough to nominate themselves for a promotion. And this is a thing.
It is. There's statistics. There are survey statistics that show men, when they're applying for a promotion, they think they're actually overqualified. That's what their beliefs are, and then women, on the other hand, think that they don't deserve it.
But I think it really goes back to actually us as girls and women, and making a decision to do what we're passionate about. And today, actually, the ecosystem out there, I'm not saying it's perfect, but the ecosystem out there actually wants to help.
It's
so,
improving.
for example, for me as a woman entrepreneur, people keep asking me this, like, what are your challenges as a woman entrepreneur? And I actually haven't had any challenges that are specific to being a woman entrepreneur. My challenges are pretty much about being an entrepreneur. And I've been extremely fortunate to have, been surrounded by, an amazing co-founder, an amazing team, amazing investors who actually don't treat me any differently because I'm a woman. And that world exists out there. There are more and more people like that. And if you actually are a woman in tech, you're probably going to make it if you're good at what you do. And I think the first step really goes down to us as women and girls
committing to that industry.
Making that decision.
Absolutely.
Do you think the generation is alive to where, like, let's say like 10-year-olds, when those people when they graduate college, like at that point, you think that there really will be more equality in numbers and you start to see that more women in the industry, or do you think we still got like a little bit further to go?
I think it's too early to comment.
Okay.
For example, like I keep saying this all the time, that I don't think the problem exists. Like, I think mostly the world is trying to solve it in university. I think university is already too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It needs to be solved in primary school.
Early on.
It needs to be solved when, when you're choosing between going to homeschool or when you're choosing between like learning electronics when you're in like 7th grade and doing something else. I think that's really where, change needs to happen. I don't think there's enough happening there yet. Mainly because most of the people who are investing in getting more women into STEM or women into tech are large companies that essentially are focusing on getting more women into their workforce, right? So investing in, first graders really it makes no sense, which means that we as a society need to figure out, government, philanthropy, all of that needs to really come together to solve that problem at a completely different level.
Girls really do run the world. Kevin, remember it.
Yes, ma'am.
So now we're going to wrap it up.
Or
unless you have another question.
I missed a couple questions. So I guess it's another idea, like analyzing photos. And you had an app that people went out and took photos to give you more data, essentially. Is there an opportunity out there for someone who, like, hey, I've got some free time. Can I download an app and you guys pay me for photos of specific things because you're trying to teach an AI. You're teaching an AI to recognize bicycles. So is there an opportunity for freelancers to go out there and just take photos of bicycles and submit it, or is it pretty? I don't know. Yeah, is it?
So it's cool that you're asking that question, because actually there is like a bunch of innovation happening there in terms of how to collect more training data for machine learning algorithms. There's products, for example, in fact, you don't even need to necessarily go and take a photo somewhere. For example, there are products out there that basically on e-commerce sites would show you, like, for tagging of different kinds of, like, cataloging of different kinds of items, would basically show you 2 kinds of items and then basically get you as a human to add context to it. More and more of that is becoming real today. And, you know, there are definitely opportunities out there for doing a bunch of that. It still hasn't become a job, right? Like, I think the industry is still trying to figure out supply demand for it to become as big as, for example, driving a cab would be today, right? Or as lucrative as that. But there are definitely opportunities like that out there in the world. And it's still early. Obviously, like I said, only 0.5% of the world's data is getting analyzed today, right? So it's still very early. But I would go on to say that potentially in the next sort of decade, jobs like that, like full-time jobs like that, could actually be reality.
Yeah, because little side hustle, like if I'm, you know, come home from work and I just want to get on the internet and start labeling photos for people for like
machine learning,
$10 an hour for while I'm watching Netflix. Like, I don't know. All right, that was the last question I really wanted to ask. Let's get into some fun ones. And being our podcast is geared towards our age group, are you going to subscribe to our podcast and listen from now on? You said you're a fan of podcasts, so
of course. You guys are really fun.
I appreciate that. Well, all of our episodes are just as good. So we can officially say that someone who's on the list of under 30 is
subscribe to our podcast.
Yeah. You guys, you're giving us clout. That's awesome.
Can you get me on the 30 under 30 list? Can you help me out? Who do
you contact to get on that list?
How do I submit my application?
Well, actually, they do have an application online. If you want to nominate yourself. It's actually a pretty fair process.
Did you get nominated?
I think I got nominated. Yeah.
Did it just
show
up?
They don't tell you. They don't tell you. They don't tell you how.
Oh, it's anonymous.
So yeah, they don't tell you if you got nominated or like what the selection process was. I mean, so they have a selection process after that, but you don't necessarily know completely.
Yeah.
Did you just like open up a magazine and your face was on it and you're like,
no.
Okay.
No, come on, they're nice guys.
You weren't walking down the street and saw your face on the front of a magazine
on
and
a
you're like,
billboard.
oh, I should probably buy this.
I'm a while away from that happening. Maybe in my
it's
30s. Maybe in my 30s.
It's going to happen though. I have faith for sure. Finally, who's the most famous person that you have as contact in your phone?
Do you have a famous person in your phone?
That's a
or the
good
most
one.
interesting person. Put it that way. It's
That's
a hard question.
So, I mean, I think I've been lucky to have done work with, I think, some large, like, film stars back home in India.
Oh, cool.
And, you know, for example, like some really big, like, stand-up comedians and stuff like that. So I guess they probably are the most famous people.
Anyone we would recognize?
Either way, that's cool in and of itself.
Yeah.
No, I know.
So if you're feeling sad, you call up your comedian friend from back home and say, tell me a joke and make me laugh.
So, I mean, like, I don't know if have you heard of this guy called Shah Rukh Khan?
You know more about comedians than I do. I'm
Bollywood movie star.
Or movie stars.
Either. Maybe. I don't think. American television. You probably won't know them.
So you've hung out with actors and actresses. You get invited to all the parties.
Very little. I'm not that cool. I spend my free time reading, and you know.
Oh yeah, that's something. Like, what do you do in your free time? You're 27 years old. You started a company at 20. Like, work-life balance. Like, do you make it an emphasis in your life to really enjoy your 20s, or do you find that hard?
Or is your work your family and your baby?
Yeah. So I actually don't, and this might be a little controversial, but I don't believe in the word work-life balance as much.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I feel like the word work-life balance implies that your work is your work and your life is your life.
Okay.
And I actually think that, at least I think the ideal way that your work should be, if you're spending like at the minimum 40 hours a week working, right?
Yeah.
That's a large part of your week.
Yeah.
I feel like it shouldn't be work versus life. Like it should be more holistic than that.
Yeah.
And so for me, actually, I don't differentiate work versus life as much, which means that I actually enjoy working. I enjoy doing what I do. That's why I do what I do. And I think that really comes down to individual people and what their likes and dislikes are. So it does mean that I, of course, take out time for like things that matter to me, my family, my close friends. I love reading.
Reading books. Okay.
Those are things that I love doing as a person, and so I take out time for those things. But for me, it's not like I need to be working these many hours a week, and I need to be like taking this time off. It's actually something that. So I was interning at a large investment bank while I was in university, and my team used to basically work an average of 14 hours a day. Like they would send you an email saying your team averaged 14 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
Which I actually had no problem with. I was actually a pretty hardworking person. But I remember there was this one time that I wanted to come back on a weekend to get, catch up on some work just for my own mental sanity.
Yeah.
And my boss told me, no, you can't come into work on the weekend. And I said, why not? And then they were like, that's not good for work-life balance.
Yeah.
And then I was like...
So
I'm working like 14 hours a day. What are you talking about,
Yeah,
right? So I feel like that isn't really... Like, I should be able to work on a Saturday if I want to. I should be able to work... if I want to get out early on a Wednesday evening to go have dinner with someone who matters to me, I should be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think that's
Preach.
what the ideal life should look like if you're passionate about what you do.
I love that, actually, because that is an opposite answer than what you hear. So I like that different take. All right, I swear, last question. You mentioned you love to read. One thing we're trying to start on this podcast is reading, let's say, a book, like a leadership book, something like 7 Habits. What's the one we're reading right now?
We're reading The Alchemist right now
The
and talking
Alchemist.
about all of the
And
large
just
implications
review
of
it and kind of portray that lesson. Do you have any like good books, recommendations of books that you read in the leadership realm, or like what's your...
Interesting. So my personal favorite is this book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Oh, okay.
It's written by Ben Horowitz. It's basically his take on startups and how he built startups and some of the hardest things that he did doing that. I think it's one of the most holistic but also real books that I've read in a long time.
All right, I'll have to check that out. Thank you very much.
We had a great time with you. You're awesome. We learned so much about your perspectives, and what you're doing is really incredible.
One of the best interviews we've had.
We want to applaud you for everything, and thanks for taking the time to hang out with us.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun, guys.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right,
Bye.
Thanks for listening today, guys. For more episodes, you can now catch us on iTunes or anywhere you find your podcast at Close Up Business Podcast. Make sure to get on there and give us good reviews and share your episodes with your friends and colleagues. And for social media needs, you can now hit us up on Instagram and Twitter at COB Podcast. And be sure to follow us so you can get all of the alerts for our new episodes and check out what we're up to. If you shoot us an email with questions or comments, you can do so at cobpodcast@gmail.com.